So good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of Code on the Beach. I hope you guys have been having a good time. My name is Cecil Phillip, as you can see by the little text that's on this slide right here. You can find me at Cecil Phillip on Twitter. So me, I'm a .NET developer, as you could probably manage, because I'm going to be talking to you about .NET stuff. I've been doing this for close to 9 years, man. I'm getting old, man. But so typically, I'm an ASP.NET developer, C# developer for most of my life. If you hear a little bit of an accent come out of me, I am from the Caribbean, so I apologize for any funny language that comes out of my mouth.
Which part of the Caribbean?
I'm from Antigua.
From Trinidad.
Are you?
Yeah.
My island brother, welcome. All right, so really quickly, a little bit more about me. So I got to plug my show. I have a podcast that I started with my partner that's working the camera in the back. It's called Away from the Keyboard, and what we do is we interview different people in the technology field, and what we try and do is really get out of them, what are their passions and inspirations. Like we talk to technologists not about technology. So if you're a database guy, I don't want to hear about your database. Pretty much is what it is. But hey, if you're into cooking, if you're into travel, if you're into that types of stuff, we want to hear those types of stories, because a lot of the times too, we forget the story behind the technology. And as you guys know, we build technology for people. So it's very important for us to understand the people that help us build a lot of these tools and utilities that we use every day. So that's really what our show focuses on. So I definitely want to have you guys please check it out. Love the show. It's a passion of mine right now, so I appreciate that. Also, I want to say thank you to RethinkDB. They provided all the shirts that you guys lovingly took. And there's some stickers and stuff like that they have up here. So if you guys didn't get a chance to get any stickers, please come. I am not taking these home. They're staying here. So really quickly, what are we talking about today? So we're talking about ASP.NET MVC 6 and even to ASP.NET 5. So are you guys familiar with any of the new stuff that's been happening actually? How many of you guys are ASP.NET developers? Oh, great. How many of you guys are MVC developers? How many of you guys have seen this already and I don't need to talk anymore? Okay, just making sure. So specifically what we're talking about today is, I'm not going to go ridiculously deep into the details of how the runtime works, but what I really want to do is highlight for you guys how much of your existing skills today, since you guys are already familiar, carry over into the new framework. I want to show you guys, if you're new, for the few of you guys that are, how easy it is for you guys to get started. And also, too, there's really nothing for you to really be afraid or be concerned about. A lot of people, and every time Microsoft releases some new stuff, they're like, oh boy, I just learned this one the other day. There's some more stuff coming out. So what you're going to see is a lot of your skills still translate over. A lot of the work that you've done can still come over, so you don't really have to worry about it. Another disclaimer I want to put up, too, is that I'm going to be showing you a beta framework. It's not production ready. If it crashes, I apologize. I did not write it. Excuse me. One of the things too about that too, excuse me. One of the things about it too is that this thing is changing constantly. So what you notice, I'm going to show you beta 6 today, and with beta 6 that was released maybe about 2 or so weeks ago. There's going to be another beta 7 that's going to release. And actually what I'll do is let me go and I'll show you what's in their GitHub repo. And I'll show you what they have going on. But here we go. Right, so beta 6 just released. There's going to be a beta 7, a beta 8, and sometime in 2016 or so, there's going to be the RTM version. So one of the things that you might want to ask is, well, why are we even talking about this thing if it's not going to be ready until next year, and it's still, they're still working on the pieces and they're not completely baked in yet. And one of the things that I always tell people is, it's always good to know what's coming up, but also too, because Microsoft is being really open with the way that they're building this thing. And so that's giving all of us the opportunity to come in and actually share our opinions about what we like and we don't like about the framework, right? Like if, we stay silent, we don't share our opinions, they don't know what to build, they don't know how you guys feel about it. So one of the things I definitely recommend you guys do is to go out to their pages, participate in the GitHub issues and the different talks and whatnot that they do. So they can let your opinion be known and you guys can understand what's happening and they could get your feedback from it too. So let's talk about where we are today. So today, if you install .NET, and you're looking, if you're an ASP.NET developer like most of you guys are, you get everything, right? You get WCF in the install, you get WPF in the install, you get stuff for building Windows services, you get ASP.NET, you get the whole shebang in there. And that's good because, hey, you know what? We get everything we need. We got this whole bundle of really rich, mature software. But sometimes you really don't want all of that, right? Like, why should I have to install WPF DLLs if I just want to write, why should I have to do all that if I just want to write a simple web application, right? Like, there's no need for me to do all of that. Another thing, too, is, there's really poor support out of Windows. So what you find is a lot of the startup guys, if you notice, like, most of them, hey, I can't afford to pay for Visual Studio. I have my Linux box. I just want to go in and knock up some stuff really quickly. And it's really poor support for me to run my stuff on Mac. I can use Mono, but I think Mono right now only supports up to MVC 3, kind of, sort of. And then there's really no strong web server that we could use on those environments that we could run our applications on. So one of the things that Microsoft did was they took the time to look at where the web was going. Like, the web moves really quickly, as you guys can tell. There's a new JavaScript framework probably every 10 minutes or so. And so with how fast the web moves, it comes to a point where you say, okay, well, all of this stuff that we've built so far, maybe we should really reevaluate how we're doing it, because it's going to be very hard for us to keep adding new features to it constantly. Like, you can imagine, Microsoft has done a really good job at supporting us since .NET 2.0. Your .NET 2.0 apps will run on ASP.NET 4.5 and 4.6 today. But does that mean that all of that stuff that came along with it from all those years ago, 16 years ago actually is how old this thing is, all of the stuff that came along with it, do we actually really need all of that stuff? And now, how fast is it going to be for us to iterate over and be adding these new features and functionality to it? So to do that, before we go into exactly some of the things that are coming in the new framework, if you guys have been paying attention lately, like, there's been a lot of new announcements that Microsoft has been talking about. So one of the big things is that now the framework is open source, right? So again, it's on GitHub. You can go look at the code. You could read the issues. And even if you don't contribute to it, I find it's very much a good learning experience for you guys to go in and really understand what the code is doing. One of the use cases they're actually going to support is being able to debug source inside of Visual Studio, which I think is going to be very cool. So you can go into their GitHub repo, you can download the source for MVC. You could put it in your Visual Studio, and now it'll just debug through it. And you can actually go through the framework and see exactly what it's doing. I think that's a really good use case. Another really good thing, too, that I think they're going to be doing is we're going to have this thing called the .NET Core runtime. So what that is that's a much smaller, condensed version of the runtime. And what you can do is you can have it run cross-platform on different machines. And you'll also be able to have it localized to your application. So you can imagine, let's say, a new version of .NET came out yesterday, right? And your IT admin say, okay, well, we're not going to install that right now. We're going to do that in 6 months or so, that type of stuff. What you could actually do with this is that runtime will actually run connected to your application. You can even run it in a folder. And essentially, all you have to do is just change the path, right? Change the path and say, hey, I want my app to run on this. Now that process will be running with that version of .NET, which I think is very cool. And we'll see as we go forward how some of these things really affect how we run the framework. So what are we getting out of the ASP.NET 5 stack specifically is that we're getting a new version of MVC. We're getting MVC 6 is what we're really going to talk about today. We're going to get a new version of SignalR. We're going to get NAD Framework 7 and a lot of cool new tooling features. And again, remember, this is cross-platform. So when I say tooling, it's not just tooling for running in Visual Studio, but it's also going to be tooling that's going to run on Mac and Linux also, which I think is also very cool. So now, I'm not a big slide guy, right? Like I would give this talk the other day in Orlando, and I think I had like 20-something slides in it. And last night I was going through it, and I thought, you guys really don't want to see too many slides, do you? Like it's Saturday morning. You guys probably want to look at some code, right? So I cut my slides. It's probably in like 75%. So we're going to spend the rest of the day looking at code. Is that cool? Does that work with you guys? So what this is right here is this is the link to the GitHub site. The code's up right now. If you guys want to go on your tablets or your phones or anything like that, you guys can follow along. And we'll see how it goes. Right? Sounds good? Is there any questions or anything like that before I jump into the demos and we start going through some of the stuff? You guys excited? You guys good? Yeah? All right, let's go. Let's do it. All right, so today I'm going to be running this on Visual Studio 2015. Right? So one of the things too I want to highlight to you guys, so I'm actually running the community version of Visual Studio. It's free, it's not the Express version. The difference with this and Express actually is that this version actually runs all of your plugins that you want. So what you'll notice is I have Web Essential installed, I have ReSharper installed, and I have a couple other extensions that are installed in here. But it does have like pretty much most of what you need to actually run your applications. So I have a solution here. I'm going to run the demo first, and then we're going to go through the project. We're going to look at how it's set up. We see some of the different things are. I was messing with this morning. Hopefully it doesn't break. OK, so I decided to do something a little bit different with, you can't see the edge of that, can you? I decided to do something a little bit different with these demos. So this is either going to go really well, or this is going to be a complete disaster, and you guys are going to be like, that was dumb, you shouldn't have done that. So what I'm showing here is on the left side of this, what I'm going to have is we're going to have like the different sections that we're going to go through, the different topics. And then here in the middle, I'm going to show you the code and the samples and how it actually does what it does. So here, when you start up, the main thing that you're going to see inside of your application is you're going to have a startup class. So if you guys, again, are familiar very much with how it works today, this will typically be what your global.asax file is. Right? I'm going to come in here and I'm going to set up how my application works. So for instance, if you want to set up your routing, you should set up bundling and minification, all that stuff. It's got to actually happen in here. But this actually happens at a much lower level now, because what you'll notice is, here, I'm actually coming in here and I'm telling the app, I want to use MVC. Right? If I didn't put this in here, pretty much what I'd have is, I just have a very bare bones application that'll just run on sockets alone, right? So the interesting thing about that it shows that what you can do is you can just keep building up the pieces that you actually need for your application. So if I didn't add this, like I wouldn't have MVC in my application at all. I'll just be writing raw HTTP sockets, which, depending on what you're doing, maybe that's what you want to do. But now you have the option to add and remove as much as you want to the application. Which is one of the really things I like about this framework, right? It's very much of an opt-in type model. So here, by convention, what it's going to look, as your application starts up, it's going to look for the startup class. And the startup class is expecting to have this configure function in it. And now here you're going to see it's saying, here, use my MVC routes. Right? And so this looks familiar to you guys, right? You guys know how to set up routes before. The only thing that's really different, and that's a little bit of a convenience to us, is now, inside of the template, we can specify the defaults in the template itself. So typically before, if you remember, there was like another line here, and it'll say defaults, and it'll say controller equal this, action equal to that. Now that can actually just happen in line too, so you guys don't have to muck around with that too much. And so essentially, this is pretty much all you need to just start loading up that runtime for you, so it'll run your application. So let's talk about dependency injection real quick. So are you guys familiar with dependency injection and IOC containers and how that stuff works? So with dependency injection, pretty much what we do is we can register services, and then it'll put it in a container. Now we can ask that container, hey, can I have this service, please? Can you give it back to me? One of the really cool things about this framework now is that it has dependency injection built into it, which I think is fantastic. Before, if you had, for instance, if you had an application that was running MVC, an application that was running SignalR, an application that had Web API in it, what happened was you'd have 3 different dependency containers. And for me, that was very much of a pain, right? Because, for instance, I use AutoFac. And so I'd have to wire up my AutoFac containers 3 different times to get my dependencies across. But now it's built into the framework. We can, inside of our startup class now, we can have this configure services function that the framework is just going to look by convention. If you notice, I'm not inheriting from anything. There's no interfaces or abstract base classes or anything like that. And it's going to say, hey, for these services, I want you to add, for instance here, I want you to add my in-memory session service, right? And what you notice here is like I'm adding the same service 3 different ways, right? Just so you guys can see what we do. So you can add it as transient. Transient pretty much just means, hey, every time I ask for a new one, give it back to me, pretty much. Right? Add scope means that it's scoped to the request. So typically what happens is that we make an HTTP request and it comes back. So the lifetime of that request, when the request is over, what will happen, it'll dispose the service that's inside of there. And here, add instance means that, okay, well, every time you ask for that service, I'm going to give you this specific instance. So this is where we wire it up. Well, what you'll notice is dependency injection is a theme that flows all throughout the framework. And again, this is very much like if you don't want to use it, you don't have to. You're not forced to. Like if you completely don't add this function at all and you just use MVC, your application will work just fine. But for a lot of us that appreciate the pattern of adding it to our applications, it's something that's there for us, and now we don't have to worry about, hey, plugging it into different things. So now it'll work for your API controls, and it'll work for your regular MVC controls, and whenever CoreCLR is plugged into it, it'll work for CoreCLR too. And so what I have here, so that's the code sample. I have the actual sample of what it's pulling here. So I'm going to show you the code that's actually pulling this. So that is going to come from, so here's my MVC controller. And what you notice here is that that service I just registered, my iConference service, my iConference session service, I'm pulling it in, and now I have it inside of my controller. And, excuse me?
No autofact, no container.
There's no additional container here. There's no autofact, ninject, Windsor. There's none of that inside it. This is just purely what's inside of the framework. If you wanted to, there's extensions that you can plug those in. But what you get is a very bare bones experience for dependency injection. So on top of that, what I'd say is, so there's some things that those richer frameworks have, like for instance, like with autofact, you can do, for instance, like attribute-based and metadata and add that types of stuff. With this one too, this is purely just, hey, just put some stuff in, I'll put it out. It's very basic. Yes, sir?
How does it deal with multiple implementations of the same interface? How does it choose?
Sure. So what you can do is, when you register, so there's a couple options you have. So you can do a try add, right? So what I was doing, you just saw me do add before. I just did add this interface with this implementation. You can do a try add. What try add does is, if it's there already, it's not going to add it. So in that situation, the first one wins, right? Or if you're registered there already, I'm not going to overwrite it, right? If you don't do a try add, and you just do a second one, then whatever's in there is just going to win, right? So you can just add it, or you can do try add. Try add just means that if it's there already, I'm not going to add it there for you, right? Right, and so what you notice here now, I have my action method, right? And I'm just calling get sessions on my conference session service, right? And it's just returning it to my view. So far looking at this looks pretty much how MVC looks today, right? Like, is there anything in here that looks any different to you? Not really. But what we do have now is that we've just added that added benefit of being able to have dependency injection in the box, which I think is very cool. So let's actually go take a look at the view for this and see what the view looks like. This is in, so here's my view. And again, this is just some bootstrap, and this is really just bootstrap in here. There's really nothing special going on here. But as you can see, like, your views are the same. I'm using Razor views. And what I'm doing is, against my model that I have, so my model, it would be those list of sessions that I just returned, right? And you see I have it labeled up here. I have an IEnumerable of conference sessions. I'm just going to loop through that model. And yeah, I just loop through that model, and I'm just spitting out spans and divs pretty much, right? There's nothing crazy happening here. But again, this is just going to show that you can still use a lot of that code that you already built and you wrote, it'll very much translate over to what we're doing over here today. Right. So let's move on to the next one. So that's dependency injection. You guys have any questions about that before I go on? No?
Has it moved kind of down to or is there plans for it to move down to like storage layers and whatnot, or other services? Because I saw it was just core service.
What do you mean like storage layer? What do you mean exactly? I'm sorry.
Here kind of just said the service layer, between the service layer and the control. So is that also, can we implement this at the storage layer? Is that like a different?
Oh, so you're talking about if I had different layers of application code? Yeah, so it'll go all the way down. So you can imagine your MVC application is like the main entry for your app. And so let's say my service class had a dependency on some other stuff. Like it'll go all the way down and pull it. I mean, well, obviously you have to register that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, as long as it's registered, like it'll pull it out for you. So configuration is another really cool thing that they have built into the framework. And what we have now is the ability to do more strongly typed configuration. So today, like for instance, web.config is no longer there with us. What we do have, though, is the ability to create our own configuration files and kind of parse those and get information out of those as we see fit. So here, what I'm showing you, this is just this is a simple POCL class. There's no attributes on it. There's no special things going on here. Pretty much, this is just a class that says, hey, here's some values. I want you to pull this out of the configuration for me. Let's take a look really quickly and see what the code to do that looks like. So first of all, if you guys look down here, I have a couple of files, right? I want you to notice I have a file here that's called config.json. So when you do file new project, you're going to get this config.json file by default. Depending if you do empty template or not, like it may or may not have some stuff in there, but it's just a plain JSON file, right? And so inside of my config.json, I just set up some very basic values, right? I have a conference, I have the conference website, I have the location inside of it. Now going back to my startup class, remember my startup class is where a lot of this stuff happens. In the constructor here for my startup class, what you'll notice is that what I have is a configuration builder. My configuration builder is saying, I want you to add this JSON file. And I pass the name of the JSON file. And I also want you to add environment variables. Right? So now, when I go into my configuration, it's going to look into those two different places, and it's going to pull configuration information for me. So that's why when you see here, I go to these values that are here. So like these values here are coming out of that JSON file that I have specified here. One of the things you notice too that we also get is we get nested configuration. If you look at the location object, you notice that it nests, right? So it's not just key value pairs, right? We could go all the way down as much as we like. Also too, it's not just JSON files. You can write your own configuration provider, and you can do plain text files if you want. You can do CSV files if you want. If you are so inclined, you can go back and get XML data if you want. Whatever the case is, right? The option is completely up to you. But the main theme I want to drive through as we're going through all of these demos is that it's really about choice. It's really what you've gotten out of this framework, right? Even, again, from setting up MVC, do I want MVC or not in my application? Do I want to get configuration values out of this type of file or not in my application? And they just make it really easy for you to go in and do that type of stuff. So let's actually look and see where so this is where I set up the configuration. Let's see where I actually go and tell it to configure my, my custom class. Let me get rid of this. This is a little annoying. So this line is right here. So services.configure, I'm passing in the type, which is my custom configuration class. And from the configuration object that I set up before, I'm saying get configuration section. What's the configuration section? Well, that's this top-level object that's here, right? Like I put stuff into this configure top-level JSON object. And that's it. So what it'll do now, it'll just go match property for property, and it'll just pull that in for you. And now if we go back to my controller, using dependency injection, I can say iOptions, my configuration options. iOptions is just the pattern that they're using and the framework that they're using to allow you to pull strongly typed configuration out. Right? So we have a custom configuration class. We call configure inside of our startup class. And in our controller where we need it, I'm pretty much coming here and I'm saying, hey, I need this configuration. Again, building on dependency injection, which we talked about previously. Right? You guys still with me? Because this is what we're going to keep doing. We're going to go through some of these smaller pieces. We're going to keep building and building and building on top of it until we get to some more of the complicated stuff. So that's how configuration works. Now, middleware is another interesting topic that we have in the application, in the framework. So in MVC, ASP.NET 5 and MVC 6, we no longer have HTTP controllers, HTTP modules and HTTP handlers. So if you guys are familiar with that stuff before, you know we had stuff like, there's like a forms module that run and did authentication for us. Or there was a session module, and there was even a caching module. We had handlers that handled certain types of files when we came in, and we can write custom ones of those. We don't have those anymore. But what we do have is a little bit more of a pluggable pipeline where I can say, excuse me, I want these types of middleware to run first before, or they can even run after your application, have my application run, and then it'll come back down. So it's almost like you can kind of look at it like as a chain. So my request happens, my request hits my web server, it's going to go up the pipeline through the different types of middleware that I have. Right? So this is going to get the request, this is going to get the request, this is going to get the request. It's going to call my application. If there's anything else after that, it can or cannot get called, and it'll come all the way back down. So this is going to get the response, this is going to get the response, this is going to get the response. And so what are some of the use cases that we can have for that? Like, what would we do with that type of information? So one of the use cases today is we can implement security. So let's say you're doing API key validation, and you have API keys that are attached to your header. In the first middleware, you could say, oh, OK, cool, you don't have this API key. I'm going to send you back. I'm not going to allow you to go any further. I'm not going to even allow you to get to my application. Right? Another thing that we could do is we can do probably even caching. Right? We could say, oh, OK, you asked for this request before. I already have it in cache. You don't need to go all the way up to the application. I'm just going to give you back what I have already. Like, we can implement things like those inside of it. And so here's a really bare bones example of middleware. This is just boilerplate. It's really not doing anything. So again, if you notice, there's no subclass, there's no interface. It's very, very simple, very bare bones, very plain classes that we're talking about. But the only thing that you have to do in this case is you need to implement a invoke method that returns a task. Right? And so in that invoke method, we're going to get the HTTP context. You guys know about HTTP context, right? We know how that works. This is not the same HTTP context that we're used to before. So HTTP context typically was a static variable that we had. Excuse me, we used to have cache and session and all these things out of it. This is a much lighter, bare bones version of HTTP context, right? They did it that way too because it's a lot easier to mock, a lot easier to test, and that type of stuff. So we get the context, and then we can expect the request or even the response. We do something with it, and then here in this call next. What do you think next is doing? It calls the next middleware, right? So it pushes that request and it keeps it going down the pipeline until it gets to your application. Or you can say, hey, I don't really want you to keep going. Let me just return and not call next. So I could short circuit that communication from going forward. And here at the bottom, again, in our startup class, remember we talked about startup class before? Everything happens in the startup class. Inside of our configure, we're just saying, I want you to use this middleware. Now, the thing to know about middleware, too, is when you configure it inside of your startup class, the way that you set it up is the way that it's going to run. So the first middleware that you put in there is the first one that's going to run. And the second one you put in, the second one is going to run. Again, it's very simple, right? First one, second one, third one, until you get to use MVC at the bottom, is actually going to run your MVC application. Now, this is a very simple concept, but again, what we get out of this is, again, we get choice, right? We get the pluggability, right? You get to say, hey, well, this is the order that I want these things to run in my application. I want it to go in this order. Yes, sir?
If invoke is expected on a middleware, why is there no interface?
So a lot of what happens in this framework is it does it by convention. There's a configuration over convention theme that goes out throughout a lot of this. So the same thing with the startup class too. Like, how does it know I need to call the startup class and I need to call configure, or even configure services? Right? It's just doing it by convention. Any other questions, guys? Yes, sir.
How would you get the middleware to run after the app?
Okay, sure. So remember, so this is just returning a task, right? So one of the things that we can do with task is that we can call continue with. So if you call continue with after your task, what you will be essentially doing is, hey, call this method, and then I'm going to continue with the response, right? So you call next to pass it the request, and then continue with, you can do a response. Or I could do async await on the method signature. So this would now turn into public async task invoke, and then I could await next, right? I get a task back from that, and then what I get from that would essentially be my response, right? And now I can do some post work after I get that, and then keep on going.
The constructor in the middleware has a request delegate. Will that always be injected?
Yeah, so that's always injected too. Again, carrying along the theme of dependency injection. What that is just the next request that comes in, pretty much.
The options.
Well, the what? Oh, I should have cut that out. I'm sorry. So what the options are, so what they were before I was mucking around with this, this sample. So those are just the options that I was showing you before in the previous sample, where I had like that custom configuration. So again, so if you wanted to pass your configuration into here, I could have done my options of my configuration class, and then you would have gotten them in there too.
Because those are registered in the container in startup. So that
Yeah, because I configured it in startup, and so it gets pushed all throughout the pipeline. So anything that wants it, all I have to do is just add it to the constructor, and I'm just going to get it. All right, cool. Let's keep moving forward a little bit. So let's look at a real example of middleware. That one actually didn't really do anything very much. So let's actually look at one that does something a little interesting. So I wrote this one a couple days ago. And what this one does is this one does blacklisting, blacklist IPs. So that's essentially, hey, if your IP is not in the list, I'm going to kick you out. Right? Really simple to do. So what we're doing here is, if you notice, again, I get my request delegate like we were talking about, which is the next request that's going to come in. And I have options of blacklist options, which again, that's just a POCO class, right? Let's take a look at it actually. This is blacklist, my blacklist options. There's really nothing fun going on in here. It's just a list of IP addresses. So I get my list of IP addresses. I get the next middleware to call that's going to come along in the pipeline. And inside of my invoke, pretty much what I do is from my connection, I get the IP address of the connection that I'm running. And I'm going to say, in my options, do I actually contain this IP address that I want to backlist? If I do contain it, here you notice I'm right off of the HTTP context. I'm just doing a response.write, you shall not pass. Pretty much is what I get. And I'm setting the status code to unauthorized, which is a 401. Right? If it doesn't contain that IP address, I'm just going to call next. Right? So here we could continue, or we could say, no, you're not going to go anywhere, and we're going to send it back the other way. And so going back into our startup now, I'm going to open the configure real quick so you guys can see where it is. So what I did was I have this use blacklist extension method that I personally created. Right? And if we go to the implementation of that, if you notice, all I'm doing is I'm just calling use middleware, for instance. And that's all that's happening. So I call use middleware. And that's happening before it gets to my MVC application. If you see, there's some other stuff in here that we're going to talk about. But my use MVC is all the way here at the bottom. So that means that if you get blacklisted, you're not going to get to this point where you're even calling routes and executing any of the code that's inside of my MVC application. Right? It stops at the top, and then we send it back to where it's coming from. And then we just wire it here at the top. All right, let's keep going real quick. Oh, I breakpointed that. I didn't know I did that. Oh, there's one here too. Okay. I don't remember all of those. Okay, so we talked about dependency injection. We talked about configuration. We talked about middleware. So now let's get into some more of what we'll do on a real day-to-day basis in working with this framework. So one of the first things you might want to do is, okay, well, there's no modules in there. How do we do authentication? Right? So what I have here is a very simple page. Doesn't do anything. I'm going to put in my super secret password. And yay. Why did it bring me here? That's not good. OK, there we go. So OK. And it's now taking me into this authorized page. I've just logged in. So what does the code for that look like? So what I'm doing now, we just talked about middleware. I'm adding cookie authentication middleware to my application. Right? So we talked about dependency injection. We talked about configuration. We talked about middleware now. And we're talking about how we're going to configure authentication using this middleware. So I'm going to say use cookie authentication. And here I'm just setting up some basic values, right? Like the name of the cookie, the authentication scheme. If I need to log in, like this is the route that I want you to go into. This is my login route. And here I have secure option, same as request. So this could be either, this should probably be secure, which you guys probably want to do. That'll just make sure that the cookie is SSL-based cookies. But again, so this is pretty much all we need to do from a middleware standpoint to authenticate our app. So where do you guys think this would go? Would this go before or after our MVC middleware? It'll have to go before, right? Because I want to authenticate you before you go into my application, right? I don't think we want to do it the other way around. We might run into some problems if we do that. So let's see what our actual login looks like. So I have this secured controller. And so this is what our login action looks like. So I'm getting a username and a password and a return URL, right? What I'm saying is, pretty much I'm really not doing any special security check. Like you could change my is null or empty and actually go to your database or OAuth or whatever it is that you guys need to do. So pretty much you validate your user. And here what I'm doing is that I'm setting up this thing called claims. Right, so the new authentication mechanism is built on this thing called claims-based identity. So instead of just doing usernames and roles, what we could do is we can have some more fine-grained control by adding like these tokens to our users. So here I'm just saying, hey, my name is Cecil. I have a role of admin, and I can Twitter Cecil Phillip. Whatever string combinations you want to put in there, you can. I can have multiple roles, for instance. If I want to add another role, I just add another line to it. And again, you can imagine this will come out of your database or wherever your configuration is coming from. And here I just say new claims identity. I pass in the claims I created, right? This string could be anything. And I'm going to say my name claim is going to be where my username is going to come from. That's what this position and this parameter is for. And my role claim is going to be, or my roles are going to come from this role claim. Right? That's what that constructor is doing. And now for my HTTP context, I'm just going to say authentication sign in with cookies, and I'm going to pass in that claims identity that I had, pretty much. So we wired up the middleware in the back. We're going to get these claims, like who is this user and what kind of stuff does he have? What kind of properties does he have? You can imagine we can add email in here, or we can add his address in here if we wanted to for whatever reason. Then we create his identity, and we say, sign in this person. Then he gets signed in. And now if we want to log him out, we'll go back to the HTTP context, and we can call sign out on that authentication object that's in there. So again, very, very simple, very easy for us to go and sign up. And actually, too, if you guys are using MVC today, you can actually use cookie-based middleware today if you pull in any of the Katana pieces. If you guys are familiar with Katana and the stuff that they're doing for that with MVC 5, it's very, very much a similar concept. All right, let's keep this going. OK, so let's start talking about some new stuff. Actually, let me come here. I'm going to sign up. So let's talk about some new stuff. So one of the new features that I really like in this framework is this thing called tag helpers. So tag helpers is very similar to It's almost like a beefed up version of HTML helpers. So when we go into our Razor markup, we type at HTML dot index, or we type, we create anchor tags, or we can create drop downs and stuff like that. Like that helps us to generate that HTML for us. What we have now is this thing called tag helpers. What that is pretty much a way for us to create custom elements for our application. Again, too, that's also similar to, if you guys are familiar with web components, it's kind of sort of similar, except this is happening on the server side. Let's take a look really quickly at what the HTML for that looks like. So for this particular sample, I'm just creating a custom attribute. I'm going to show you what my attribute is. Secure, demo secure. So I've created this custom attribute, and I've set it to admin. So what I'm saying now is that this section of code that's inside of here, I only want this to show, I only want this to get rendered to the page when somebody is logged in as admin, right? And you saw previously how we set up somebody to be logged in, and we can add those claims and say, hey, this role, he's in that admin role. Now I'm going to get that information back out, and I'm going to say, for this section of the page, I don't want to see you, I don't want you to see this piece unless you're an admin, for a sec. So let's go in really quick and see what's in here. Let's see how do we actually create this middleware. So here what you see, I have a tag helper. This one actually inherits from a tag helper base class that's going to add some extra methods for us. But the main thing that I need to do is I need to override this process class. There's actually two. There's process and there's process async. What it'll do is it'll look for process async first, and if you don't have it, it'll run process. I'm saying that too because if for whatever reason you guys decide to add both, it's only going to run one of them. But here what I'm doing is I'm setting up at the top, I have an attribute that says target element div. So this is going to run and it's going to look at the different divs that have an attribute of demo secure. Right? So it's going to go through that Razor markup, and it's going to look for that attribute on div tags. Another thing I could have done, I could have not used the div. I could have created my own tag, for instance. I could have just called it my secure tag, for instance. I know it'll work the same way. So I'm going to look for this attribute. And if you notice here, I'm saving the attribute right here. So right here, I have this role. And that's what I specified in the markup that you guys saw. And now here at the bottom, you see I'm going to get the user out of the HTTP context. I'm pretty much just calling is in role. If you're in this role, I'm just going to continue running. If you're not in the role, then I'm going to suppress output, which pretty much just wipes out everything that's inside of there. And now I'm just going to append here, you must log in first. And again, you guys can put whatever custom HTML or anything like that you want to put in here. But essentially, you see the concept, right? It's like, are you logged in or not? If you are, I'm going to show you the content. If not, I'm going to hide it for me. Do you guys think of any other ways that you might want to use custom tag helpers? Does this sound cool? Is this something you guys think you would use? Yeah? You guys are quiet today, man. What's going on? Jeez. I don't know if you're full or... So there's actually a few other instances of tag helpers that I'm going to show you. Is it in this file? It's not in this file. So there's some tag helpers that actually ship out of the box. So here, for instance, so I didn't write this tag helper, but no, this is a tag. This is just an anchor tag helper that comes with the framework. What I'm saying is that for a tag, for this particular a tag, I want this action to go to this control and call this action. Right? Before, the way that we would have done that, we would have typed at html-helper.action and then some strings inside of it, right? Now, one of the things that this gives us now is it allows some of the rich editing facilities that we have inside of the Razor editor to kind of get lit up a little bit. So what it could do is, we can get IntelliSense, for instance, on these actions that are here, right? And now, if we wanted to add classes, for instance, I could just come in here and I could just say, something like, class equals. Now, if you guys know how we used to do it before, we used to have to create an anonymous object, and then there's brackets, and then there's stuff in there, and it wasn't a really good experience for us, right? So this one kind of allows us to stay in HTML a little bit and still extend that HTML with some more server-side functionality. So let me take that out. So that's tag helpers. So one other thing I want to show you too, there's a very specific place you have to register your tag helpers. So if we come down here to the views, right, we're gonna see this file, and it's gonna be called viewimports.cshtml. Now what this is, you can almost look at this as like a global imports space for anything inside of your class. So you see here I have my @using demos. So that means that all of my views are going to have like that demos namespace in there. But here, you see I have the Microsoft tag helpers. That's where we got the attribute ones from. And I also added mine, which is my secure one. So you don't have to add them in here if you want. If you want your tag helpers scoped to a particular page, then you just go into that particular Razor page and you put this up here. But this is more here so it's just for convenience, because I might not want to be going and copy and pasting, add tag helper to all of my pages. Maybe I just want it available to everywhere that I go. So that's in there. All right. How are we looking on time? Okay, we got like 10 more minutes. I'm going to blow through this last one really quickly. So this one, I wanted to really quick show an example of using an actual API. API controllers. So we've talked about MVC controllers a lot, but there's actually API controllers, or the concept of API controllers is still in here. So if I go to my sessions controller, so one of the first things that I tell you guys, if you're familiar with doing web API, one of the first things you'll notice is there's no API controller base class to derive from, right? So everything is just one controller type, right? So because of that, a lot of the same things apply. Like if you notice that my dependency injection works the same way, right? And here I have my HTTP get and post attributes just like I did before, right? And now in this instance too, I'm also using attribute routing. So at the top of my class, you see it says API/controllers. So what that does is that is saying, on the API route, I want you to get the name of the controller, and that's going to be what the route is. Right, so if I put this on top of another class, for instance, now this one's going to come on, it's going to say API/sessions/whatever my actions are. Right, if this was account controller, this would be API/account, for instance. And now here, another thing that you'll notice is that I'm actually adding the method names to inside of my post and my get attributes. So before what we'd have to do is we'd have to have before what used to happen is at the top used to say route prefix, if you guys are familiar with that. And then these would have routes. So I'd have an HTTP post and a route that would say what the name of the route is. Now I just have one attribute that does both of it at the same time, which is just a little bit less typing, a little bit more convenient. Now, the one other thing too that I want to highlight about these controllers is that for the bindings, the way that the bindings work, if you're familiar with Web API, don't exactly work the same way as they do now. It's more so aligned with MVC binding than Web API binding. Like the bindings are a little different. So in Web API today, if I did a post and I sent you a bunch of JSON, what it'll do is that it'll just automatically serialize what's in the body. If I passed over like a content type of application/JSON. If I do that today, MVC is not going to bind that way. So that's why you notice here I have to say from body. Right? If I didn't have from body, what it actually does is it looks at the URL first, and then it's going to look at any, like for instance, it'll go in the URL, look at any parameters I have in there first, and then it'll come in and look at the body. But from the body, it's going to look and see if it has any form URL encoded parameters in there. Right? So for me to deserialize my JSON objects, I need to make sure that I have that from body inside of there, else my object is not going to bind. It's not going to work out. So again, running this really quickly. Right, so we saw this, so that's pretty much how that works. And one of the things I'm doing too in here that I think you guys might like, and kind of a plug to another one of my buddy's sessions, is that I'm actually running Aurelia in here. So let me show you where my scripts are. So one of the things that I didn't highlight, but I probably should tell you guys. Now we have this www root folder, right? Inside of www root, and you can rename this folder if you wanted to, but by default it's www root. This contains everything that all of your static assets. Like this is where your web server is going to host from. So this is, look at this as like your base URL, right? Like everything comes off relative to this, right? So you see I have my fonts, my images, I have some packages here. I also have some scripts running, right? And so for my API controller, I hate it when it does that. So for my API controller, what I'm doing is I am running, I don't want to show you guys that. I have this class, pretty much. I'm using ES6 in this case. I have this class, and I'm getting an HTTP client, and I'm making a call to my API. Remember I had API/controller name? Well, here it is. API, my controller name is sessions. I'm calling lists to get back that list of items that are inside of that. And now, essentially, all I do is, again, I call my service, and I set my response to the sessions on my model. And then from sessions, I pretty much just go ahead and loop through and show the list. So essentially, this is what I was doing in the previous sample, except now I'm doing it with API controllers and some JavaScript on the front end. So this particular framework, this is an Aurelia framework that I'm showing here. If you guys want, there's actually a talk on Aurelia tomorrow by Ashley. Ashley's sitting up at the front. So if you want any information about that, you can bug him after this. So we've seen some different sides of it. We've seen how to create APIs. We've seen how we do security. We've seen how to wire up middleware. And we've seen how to configure everything with dependency injection, how our startup classes work. So hopefully you guys would see that this is a lot of what you guys do today. Again, it translates over very well. There's a few little things that you need to learn and understand. But other than that, in terms of us going in and being productive, it really just gives us the option to have more lightweight framework to work with, a framework that runs on different platforms. So again, if you guys decided that you needed to run on Linux machines in the cloud because Linux machines save you a little bit of money, you could do that, right? But other than that, for me, I'm just really excited about the direction that they're taking this. So we have another couple of minutes or so. If you guys have any questions, please, let's have a chat. Yeah, yes, sir.
I missed the gold file in the structure tree.
Yes.
Was that dropped there, or did you drop it there?
So by default, when you run it,
So I noticed there was a gold file.
Okay, I have the mic on. Let me do it. So he was asking, there's a gulp file inside of the project, and he was asking specifically, I guess he was asking what is it doing in there. As of right now, it's not doing anything. It goes in there when you do file new project. It goes in there. So I didn't write any of this, and I'm actually not using any of it. But essentially, one of the things that you do get out of the new tooling is that it has really good support for task runners. So whether it's gulp or grunt, right now they have support for those two. You can actually create these tasks, and there's a task runner that exists at the bottom here, right? And so what it does is it just really makes it very easy for you to run these build steps, these JavaScript-based build steps. Again, a lot of people using gulp and grunt and those type of things to do file minification or concatenation or anything like that. Cache busting and those types of things. If you wanted to compile less or anything like that, you can use that to do this. Again, for this project, I'm not using it only because I wanted to keep the demo a little lightweight. I didn't want you to have to add a lot of stuff to look at the code or anything like that. But yeah, so the support is in here. This works with Visual Studio 2015. I don't know if there's 2013 plugin for this. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. There is? Okay, the gentleman in the back says there is. So yeah, so this is here. So this is here when you do file new project. This is kind of what they're expecting you to do, again, going forward for stuff like bundling and minification. Because as of today, there's no, if you're familiar before with how the bundling works, we had to set up the bundling inside of global.asax. That's not there anymore. So yeah. Any other questions, guys? No? Well, thank you for coming. There's stickers here. Please take these stickers. I don't want them. And I hope you guys have a good day.